Alright, so today we're going over the V-stack offense. A V-stack is any offense where players are positioned in a vertical formation. So like this. A vertical stack only describes how players are positioned on the field. It does not describe the philosophy of the offense. You can have two different teams line up exactly the same way at the start of the points, but then have completely different movement afterwards. It's important to understand which type of V-stack your team is playing. There are many different variations. Some focus more on break slide throws, and others focus more on cut variations. It's up to the team to decide which version of V-stack is best for them. Today we're going over a basic 4-side centered V-stack. So a standard V-stack will have 2 handlers and 5 cutters. Handlers play behind the cutters, and their job is to maintain possession and complete passes. Cutters line up in a stack and take turns making in or out cuts into the force side. V-stack requires that you understand force, so if you don't understand force, you should watch this video right here first. Also, there's a link in the description. Cutters play upfield, and their job is to get open, get yards, and hopefully score goals. As a cutter, it is very important to understand where the force side is at all times. So if this is the mark, the force side will be to the left. So the first cutter in line will make their cuts into the force side, trying to get as much separation as possible. So if this is the mark, the force side is to the left. I can either do an in or an out cut. I chose to do an out cut. So pay attention to where the mark is right now. The force side has changed, it is now to the right. So I make a cut to the right side. So now that we know which side to cut on, let's go over the rest of the movement. So with this mark, the force side is to the left. The first cutter makes their cut, then the next cutter goes, and you just keep on doing this all the way up the field until you are able to score. Once the cutter throws, they go to the back of the stack and wait for their turn to cut again. Then the handlers move up. The cutters can either dump it back to a handler and then go back to the stack, or throw it to the next upfield cut. If a cutter makes a cut but doesn't get the disc, they also then go to the back of the stack and wait for their turn to cut again. As a cutter, you don't want to stand in the throwing lane, or else it blocks off all the rest of your teammates. You want to get back into the stack so that the next person can go. Also, you want to make your cuts as sharp as possible. This is the key to getting open. You don't want to round them off like this. It gives more time for the defender to catch up, and it's hard to get open. In Ultimate Frisbee, there are many different types of offenses you can use. Some are very structured, and some are very loose and flexible. The H-stack is a very structured offense, and is built around trying to maximize offensive efficiency. Every player has a specific job on the field, and it takes everyone working together to make it successful. Whereas something like this, there is no structure, and everyone is free to do whatever they want. This offense isn't necessarily bad, but in general, structured offenses tend to do better because they give a more consistent experience, and players are able to focus on their strengths. A big problem with non-structured offenses is that no one knows where you are running, so it's easy to create picks and get in the way of potential open throws. Whereas in an H-stack, you have a very specific way of running, so everyone knows where you are going to be. In an H-stack, there are 4 imaginary lanes: Lane 1, Lane 2, Lane 3, Lane 4. It is your job to try to get open within your lane. Different teams will be more or less flexible with this, but in general, if you don't stay in your lane, you will end up blocking off your teammates and stall the offense. So the H-stack has 2 main positions, called handlers and cutters. A standard H-stack plays with 3 handlers and 4 cutters. So these are your handlers right here. They play behind the cutters, and their job is to maintain possession and complete passes. They are also responsible for retrieving the disc from cutters. A handler is a primary throwing position. Now these are your cutters. A cutter's job is to get yards, score goals, and to give the disc back to a handler so that they are able to go upfield again. In an H-stack, cutting lanes 2 and 4 work together. You go up and down the field, going in the same direction. And lanes 1 and 3 work together, going up and back, staying in the same direction. So altogether, it looks like this. By being opposite of the lane next to you, the thrower will always have an in and out cut to target for every throw. This is important because this means that the thrower will always have someone to target on the force side at all times. Whereas if you did something like this, the thrower potentially could have no one to target. So one of the biggest foundations of the H-stack is being able to get the disc back to a handler. This is called a dump. The handler throws to a cutter, the handler comes up to retrieve it, then the cutter dumps it back. The cutter then goes back up the field to try to get yards again. The entire offense is based around this concept. If a cutter throws the disc, they only have 3 people to target. If they dump it back to a handler, the handler now has 4 people to target, and it's in the hands of a consistent thrower on your team. If cutters are throwing up the field all the time, you aren't getting the most out of this offense. So this is how an H-stack looks all the way up the field. Handlers make their throws, cutters dump it back, you just keep on doing this all the way up the field until you are able to score. If you can center the disc to the middle of the field, it is generally a good idea. The middle of the field is a very powerful throwing position. It allows you to target everyone on the field, whereas on the sideline, you are limited to where you can throw. You just keep on doing this all the way up the field until you are able to score. A big thing as a handler is you don't want to force it into coverage. You want to use your other handlers to maintain possession. This is called a swing. Then once you swing it, then that handler is able to get yards up the field, or they swing it right back to you if no one is open. And that's the foundation of H-stack. Okay guys, so today I'm going to be going over the cutter position and breaking the skills down into different areas and showing what types of skills that you need in order to be a successful cutter. Okay, so when you play the cutter position, depending on the offense that you play, the types of cuts that you make can be very different. But I feel like there are some core groups of skills that no matter what offense you play in will be relevant. And that's what we're going to be going over in this video. So I'm going to be focusing on 7 different areas that I feel like are pretty universal. And they are fitness, reading ability, catching, route running, vision, ultimate IQ, and adaptability. These are the 7 core groups of skills that I feel like all cutters need. And you need all of these skills in order to be successful. If one of these areas is really weak, it's going to be an issue. So all of these things have to come together in order for you to be a successful cutter. Even if you're really, really, really good at one area, if one area is really weak, it's going to be very difficult for you to be consistent, because that one area is going to really plague you, because all of these skills are really important. So let's say that you are really good at catching, but you're not very good at reading the disc. Well, it's not going to matter a whole lot, because if you're not under the disc to be able to catch it, that's a big problem. Or the same thing of maybe you're really good at catching and really good at reading, but you're not very good at route running and you're never open. And that's just as much of a problem. So you have to be good at the entire process. I really want to emphasize that. You really need to work on areas that you're weak in order to make your overall game successful. Okay, so let's go over each of these areas separately and go over just like what these skills mean or what they look like. So the first group is fitness. And if you're not fit, it's going to be very hard to be a successful cutter. Playing the cutter position is a very endurance-based position. You need to be able to make cuts for a very long period of time, and they need to be very explosive, and you potentially have to do this for a couple minutes at a time. So the more fit you are, the better that you put yourself in a position to be successful. So if you're not very fit, this is an area that can really improve your game, because it can help you make cuts when your team needs you to do that. So the next group is your reading ability. Being able to read a disc means that when you see the disc in the air, you know where it's going to land. And this skill is really important, because no matter how good you are at catching, if you're not actually getting in a position to get under the disc, then you're never going to be able to catch the disc. So this skill is really important, and the better your reading skill is, the better position you're going to be in when trying to catch the disc. So the next group is catching. So even if you can get open all the time, if you can't catch the disc, that's a problem. So you need to have a high level of skill in catching so that when somebody throws you the disc, you can catch it. So the next skill is route running. Route running is when you run a very specific cut to a spot on the field. Route running also includes how sharp you can make your cuts and how efficient your line is and how deceptive you are to where you are going. Somebody that's good at route running can get a lot of separation because of their technique. So this is a skill that's really important for cutting because it's very important that you can get open in order for you to be able to catch the disc. So the next skill is what I call vision. Vision is when you see open space down the field and then you run a very specific cut to that space because you know you can get open. You can also kind of call this group instincts, but basically this group is when you are seeing open space and then running a cut to that space, and it wasn't necessarily a planned cut, it was just you saw that that space was open and then you cut to this. This is a trait that a lot of really successful cutters have, that they're able to see open areas and then exploit it, and then they're able to get really big plays because of that. The next group is what I call ultimate IQ. So understanding where the foresight is and just a lot of other ultimate concepts is really important for when you're cutting. If you're cutting to spots where your thrower can't throw to, even if you're wide open, you're never going to get the disc. So you have to have some base level of knowledge, of understanding of where your throwers can throw to and how you need to get there. And that's what this group of skills is. And the last group of skill is adaptability. So the more adaptable you are, the more systems that you're going to be able to play in, and the more consistent overall you're going to be. So you don't really want to be just only efficient in one type of offense, because if you ever go to a new team, then you may not be effective anymore. You want to be able to transition your game to multiple offenses and multiple teams. And what this skill is basically how many routes can you run, it also has to do with some ultimate IQ. So just how adaptable are you to new throwers, to new situations, and just what your team needs you to do. Okay, so today's video is going over decision making, which is the ability to read the field and then choosing the player that gives you the best chance of completing the disc for the most amount of yards. In some of my other videos, I go over how I break down throwing into two different groups, where the first group deals with skills that actually make the disc fly, such as accuracy, velocity, footwork, balance, release points, stuff like that, whereas the second group deals with visual or mental skills, such as figuring out where everyone is on the field, who to target, and what throw to use. This video is going over this skill right here. It's a group 2 skill and it's very important. It doesn't matter how perfect your form is if you're throwing to people who aren't open. So I break down decision making into 3 main steps. Number 1, being able to accurately see the separation between players. Number 2, understanding foresight versus breakside difficulty. And number 3, understanding the importance of yards. So before every throw, these 3 things should be getting mentally checked off. If the person isn't open, it shouldn't be thrown. If there's a person equally open on the break side and the force side, it shouldn't be going break side. If there's a person equally open for 1 yard or 50 yards, it shouldn't be going to the 1 yard throw. Being able to answer these 3 questions quickly and accurately is how you become consistent at this skill. So the first step in this process is being able to see the separation distance between players accurately. I focus on 4 main distances, which are not open, contested open, open, and wide open. Not open targets should never be thrown to because they aren't open, even with a good throw. Contested open targets are also not ideal, but with a very accurate throw, can be completed. Open targets are ideal, and wide open targets are the most ideal. In general, you only want to be throwing to open and wide open targets. This gives you the best chance for success. This is what the distance looks like for in cuts. It's the same thing as before, just now the target is moving towards you instead of away. You need to be able to see the distance accurately in both directions. So during this step, we are scanning the field and seeing if there's anyone with an open to wide open separation. And if the answer is yes, then we move on to the next step. Okay, so the second step of decision making is understanding force side versus break side difficulty. The force side is much easier to throw to, and this needs to be taken into account when we make our decisions. So if there's someone on the break side, in order to get it to them, you have to throw it past the mark, which is very difficult. When you are able to throw through the marking side without it being blocked, that's called a break, which is why it's the break side. But now let's say you have someone over here, on the force side. This throw goes away from the mark and is significantly easier. You just step out and make your throw. Now it gets more complicated once you start adding in the separation concept we just learned. Here we have a target force side that is contested open, and a break side target that is open. It might seem like the break side cut is the better option here, but in actuality, these two have around the same difficulty, or percent chance of being complete. Even though the break side throw is more open, the throw itself is more difficult. While the force side throw isn't super open, with an accurate throw, it will be complete. In a tie, the throw goes to the force side. So for this look, the throw should go here. Now for this example, there is a contested open force side target and a wide open break side target. For this one, the throw should go to the break side because the separation is significantly more than it is on the force side. The more separation a target has, the more margin of error the thrower gets, decreasing the overall difficulty, in this case, becomes the better throw. But let's say for this example, you have someone wide open on both the break and force side. You want to take the force side throw because it is easier because you don't have to get it past the mark. The third step of decision making is putting yards into the equation. The goal on offense is to score, and because of this, it makes all cuts not equal. The most ideal target is someone that is wide open, to the force side, and in the end zone. Cuts that have the ability to score are more ideal than ones that can't. The amount of yards you get needs to be taken into account. If you have someone open here and here, you don't want to take this 1 yard throw. Take the one that gets more yards. The first two steps figure out who is open. This step figures out who of the remaining options puts you in the best position to score. Okay, so the rest of this video tests you on how well you can see the field and do everything that we just went over. So for each example, it will give you a few seconds to scan the field, and then you want to pick the target that you think is right, and then it will give you the answer after that. Orange cones are offense, green cones are defense. The questions also get harder as you go along. So, begin. What's up guys, today we're going to be going over some tips on how to score more goals. So the first tip is to make sure that you're ending your cut in the end zone. This is something that's very important and something that's actually very easy to make a mistake on. So what can happen is is that you'll make your cut, and by the time you actually get open, you'll be out of the end zone. So what you need to do is you need to make sure that you're giving yourself enough room so that when you cut, you're still in the end zone when you're able to catch it. Tip number 2 is to make sure you're creating separation to the force side in the end zone. It's really important that you always know where the force side is. If you don't know what force side or break side is, I have a tutorial that goes over that. But basically, the break side is a lot harder to throw to than the force side. So to give yourself the best chance of scoring a goal, you want to try to create separation to the force side, because that's where you have the highest chance of getting the disc. Tip number 3 is to know the range of your throwers. It's very important that you know how far and what throws your throwers can throw. So you could be super wide open, super deep, but if your throwers can only throw 50 yards, you're never going to get the disc, or it's never going to get to you. So it's really important that you're cutting to spots on the field that your throwers can actually throw to so that you can get the disc and potentially score. Tip 4 is very similar to what we just talked about, and it's timing. In order to time your routes properly, you need to understand what your throwers can do. So, let's say your throwers can throw 50 yards. In order to score, you need to run a scoring route within 50 yards of the end zone. If you take off at the 10-yard line, you won't be set up to score correctly. So you have to time your routes properly so that you get into the end zone when your throwers can actually get it to you in the end zone. Tip 5 is to look for soft spots in the defense. During the game, a defense can have a shape that has a very big weakness. Sometimes there will be soft spots where if you run to that spot, there won't be anybody else to help. You have a really high chance of scoring. So you want to look for shapes where if you run deep, there won't be anybody else to help, and you'll have a really high chance of scoring. Tip number 6 is to make sure that your routes look the same at the beginning of the route. So I have some other videos on this, but when all of your routes look the same at the beginning, it's very easy to create separation because the defender doesn't know where you're going. If you telegraph where you're going, it's much easier to defend. So the better that you're able to disguise what route you're running, the easier it's going to be to get separation and potentially score. Tip 7 is to make sure that you're using 2 hands when catching the disc. So even if you do everything correctly, you create separation to the force side, you're in the end zone, you read the disc right, it all means nothing if you drop the disc. So it's really important that you're using the best grip possible so that you give yourself the best chance of hanging on to the disc so that you can score a goal. Tip number 8 is to make sure that you're keeping your feet in bounds. A lot of goals in Ultimate happen right on the sideline, so it's very important to be aware of where your feet are so that you can keep them in bounds so that your goal counts. Tip 9 is to try to get inside position on contested catches. It's much easier to come down with the disc when you have inside position instead of when you're on the outside. When you're on the outside, you have to reach over or around someone in order to catch the disc, and this is much harder to do. You have a lower % chance of coming down with the disc. So when you can get this inside position, you want to do it because it's going to make it a lot easier for you to come down with the disc. Tip 10 is to play the rebounds. So when somebody else is in the end zone and the disc is going to them, you don't just have to stay out here and watch. What you can do is you can keep running and play the rebound so that if it's tipped, you can potentially score a goal. And that's going to be it. So like this video if you liked it, don't forget to subscribe, and be sure to share this with anyone you think could benefit from it. This is Ultimate 101, and I'll see you next time.